And I will get the presentation to show here. While I am working on sharing my screen, folks, you are welcome to use the chat to introduce yourselves to one another, what community you're representing or firm you're representing for folks. And it would
Hi, Susan Corbett.
Morning, everyone.
Long time no see, Susan.
Indeed.
We obviously have shared screenage here. Let me see. Peggy, would you like to do an introduction of ConnectMaine for any new folks in the room while I figure out my sharing situation?
So ConnectMaine is the state broadband authority. We are charged with trying to make sure everybody in the state not only has adequate broadband, but that they know how to use it. And we've been around since about 2007, have done mostly small infrastructure grants, mostly to telecommunications or ISP providers to expand their service area. In 2015 or 16, the legislature added the authority for us to do planning grants, which are grants to help communities get started. And so I think what the legislature saw then was that there were lots of areas of the state where there had been really no provider interest. And so they were trying to spark that provider interest. And get communities to really begin to think about how they were going to expand service in their area. And so that's what planning grants are for. We have them broken into two phases. The phase one is really community planning. It's getting a group of people together in your community to talk about what it is you want broadband to do. Where is your service? What does it look like? And really, what is the purpose of making sure people in your community are connected? So really getting a good community vision of where you want to be. Then the phase two is taking that community vision and putting it in implementation. So it's really sort of developing kind of the feasibility of what is it our community wants? Do we want universal service? Are we going to have universal service? What would that look like? Are we going to own the infrastructure? What does that look like? Are we going to join a public utility with our neighboring towns, which would be my preference, that you think about doing this with your neighboring towns, because it's really inefficient to build this one town at a time. We're building networks. So it's really important to begin, even at the very early stage of the planning process, to think about this as a regional solution. So it's not just your town, it's the towns around you. So that's the phase two of the piece, is trying to figure out, we know what we want, we got our partners, our community partners in place, and now how are we going to get it? That's the phase two piece. So with this grant, this program today is to walk you through the application that we have for the planning grants. These are not infrastructure grants. You're not going to build anything with these. These grants are really to plan out what it is your community wants and how you're going to get there.
Great. So is everybody seeing the presentation now? We're on the agenda slide. Nod from Peggy or, okay, great, excellent. All right, so Peggy did a great overview of our programs and such. We'll talk a little bit about the purpose behind the funding for this program. as well as talk about pre-certification, what it is, how you do it. And then the application overview will just be the most common questions that we get as somebody opens the application to begin applying. And then we'll spend most of our time in Q&A session to basically answer any questions that you all might have generated over the last couple of weeks looking at the application. All the information is on our website, and the presentation will also be recorded and shared there. So you can share it with your committees or refer back to it as you're applying. It might be helpful. So the purpose of this particular program is to develop plans, as Peggy described, to build broadband or expand broadband availability in your communities. What goes into that planning, understanding what exists, assessing what your options are, developing plans that meet your community needs moving forward. So those are kinds of the purposes and benefits of doing this planning, is that you get to holistically look at your problem and holistically look at the possible solutions and have a matchmaking kind of situation for what solution works best for your community. It's supposed to begin the process of building community support for broadband service and identifying and addressing capacity to plan and implement the project once it gets underway. That's phase one. We'll talk more about these different phases of the planning process as we go on. And then another phase is basically taking that community to the next level of planning and expanding broadband service by designing the network, estimating your costs, developing a business and financial model, and ultimately meeting current and future needs. I think is the greatest benefit of the community-driven broadband process, is that you're not really just addressing what's wrong now, what's the quick fix, what's the cheap fix. You're really thinking about your future vision and your broadband needs for the future. So if you are going to financially commit to a big project like this, you're not turning around and doing it again in 5 years or in 10 years. And then you've got those other side benefits to any type of community planning process that are bulleted there. Switch to the next slide here. So pre-certification can actually be done two ways this round. You possibly have already done pre-certification for your community, in which case you don't have to do anything, or you want to get a head start, or you have gotten a head start on pre-certification and use the form on our website, and you can submit it before you actually submit your application for planning funds. It is a single form that's on the website for pre-certification. It's the same one that was used last fall. So it does look a little bit different than the application itself, but that it doesn't matter. Don't worry about that. You can submit this form at any time. You don't have to wait to submit it with the application. In fact, I would say don't, because the application for this round actually contains the pre-certification elements within it. So if you don't do the pre-certification before applying, you can do it with the application. It's part of the application. So those are the two ways that you can do it if you haven't already done it yet. It is a requirement for getting the grant awards, but it only has to be approved once per community, as I mentioned. It basically documents the commitment to the planning process and the effort in preparing to make the best use of the state funds, the grant funds. And it also initiates oftentimes the conversation between your community leaders and ConnectMaine, so we can make sure you're plugged into the networks and the resources in the state to facilitate the best planning possible for your community. The benefits of doing the pre-certification with the application might be the flow of filling out that application. It's a little bit clearer about what has been accomplished already and what you're proposing to accomplish with your planning project that you're seeking funds for. It may also make scoring easier for the review committee. So if you want to throw us a bone, that's another benefit of doing it within the application. It's also probably the most beneficial for a community that's done a lot of planning to date, and you just haven't happened to do the pre-certification or gotten ConnectMaine grants for planning in the past. then you may want to use the application to do this pre-certification component. The pre-certification is in section 5 of the application. And the first part of that section 5, all applicants have to fill out, whether you've done pre-certification or not. And then the rest of section 5 only has to be done by those who haven't submitted pre-certification before. And if you have submitted pre-certification before, then the application just asks for what date that was that you submitted it. So we can basically pull it up and make sure that we had accepted it. Before we go into the application, are there any clarifying questions about the pre-certification process? And you will have to unmute yourself or let Peggy know in some way that you have a question. I'm in presentation mode here.
I have a small question. So does every town hear back from you guys around their pre-certification about what's missing or any kind of feedback? Does every town get a confirmation that you've received it and then feedback?
They will get a confirmation that we have received it. And then once we've had a chance to review it for completeness, you know, just making sure that there's something there really, that's pretty much all that's required for acceptance or approval. Unless we do catch any big flag, but we haven't recently, in which case then we would respond with that flag for further additional information, you know, whether it's about completing the pre-certification or if it's clarification on a component of it. That again, it's about initiating that two-way conversation with ConnectMaine so that we can help you in the next step of planning and the next step of planning. And so helping to identify what are your strengths and what are your current obstacles, and do you see the solutions for getting over those obstacles? We want to be part of that conversation and provide that type of assistance. Because we are in not only an open application window for these planning grants, but also for our infrastructure grants, if there isn't a big major flag, you're probably not going to get a lot of feedback from us right now. But we would want to engage in that type of conversation, especially if you are awarded planning grants, or once a planning grant application is unsuccessful, then we do return to all those applicants and work with them on that fact, try to get them the resources to move forward anyway, or address the weaknesses of the application for a future round of planning grants. So if you don't get feedback immediately, we will be returning to you as our capacity allows us to. Great. Not hearing any others, I'll continue. In general, for the application as well as the pre-certification, I just can't stress the importance of following instructions, reading them and trying just to, you know, take them at face value, use a toilet paper roll if you have to isolate yourself to the instruction at hand. Anything to just, you know, answer explicitly, concisely, and directly what's being asked, and not to worry about why it's being asked or to try and elaborate beyond the topic that's being asked. That just really helps the staff in reviewing these documents, and also helps the grants committee review the applications for which ones to award. The application and pre-certification forms contain tables. You know, use them. They're there for your benefit and to help in the process of filling out the application. With regard to this particular snapshot screenshot of the pre-certification, and then this is also in the application, it's referencing the broadband committee at the community level, basically the body that's going to be driving the planning process locally. And it's really important, this is explained in the application, that the importance of this committee is this ultimate success of the project. And basically ConnectMaine and its external partners have seen a pattern over the last 5 years in particular of which communities are most successful in and through a planning process. And those communities have these types of individuals in their committee, active throughout the whole process and helping to drive the process and overcome those obstacles that I mentioned as planning unfolds. And so it really is important to have individuals in your committee that cover these 5 backgrounds and these 5 roles on the committee. What I would say again is to try to be concise in your application. Brevity is definitely best here. So just use the language in these bullet points. We don't need the life history or the CV of every single committee member. And it really helps our grants committee not have to guess that the particular role is filled based on somebody's occupation. We're not asking for a list of occupations. We're asking for these backgrounds and these current roles on the committee. How are they contributing to the current planning? Yeah, I guess the only last thing I'll say on brevity is, sharing, we want complete information, obviously, but at the sake of us all being human nature, the application itself is nearly 20 pages. So if you keep adding and adding and adding, and then we get dozens of applications, it's just going to be human nature. We're going to have a hard time keeping all that information in our head. So you want to be concise, get to the point, show your uniqueness, rather than number of words on the page. There's no prizes for that. The scoring guide is also embedded in the application. And so between the instructions of the individual elements and the scoring that's right below the individual elements, there's explanation for why we're asking for what we're asking. And that might help you in narrowing down your response to be as concise as possible. So definitely read through the application. So, other umbrella instructions, I've kind of broken these down into do's and don'ts for different people's way of thinking through, however your brain works, whether you're a do person or a don't person, but these pretty much mirror each other. The grants committee has to review dozens of these applications, as I mentioned. So really, following the instructions helps not only your case, but also helps with the efficiency and capacity of ConnectMaine, which is obviously very limited. Answering the question that's being asked and inserting the information being requested is really important. Don't reference other sections of your application. That means we have to page through or scroll back. And it makes scoring very difficult. If you find that you're referring back to other application sections, that's probably an indication that you're not providing the answers where they're being asked. So it should be a flag on yourself as you're going through the application. The only attachments that are actually allowed are anything that you think would be deemed confidential. Those you can obviously keep as a separate file in case they are confidential. We can maintain that confidentiality. Inserting can be done literally by copying and pasting, transcribing, or if you have the Adobe software, then you can combine the Adobe files when you're finalizing the application. So there are ways of inserting the information in the order requested. Generally, just be positive and forward-looking in your application. This is for ConnectMaine. We know that less than 10% or so of the state actually has 21st century internet, and then only 10% of the state currently is unserved. So there's this huge, span of areas that are in desperate need of 21st century internet connectivity. So telling us how bad the problem isn't news, and it doesn't make you unique to the other applications. Think about how you're going to overcome the challenges of planning for broadband. That's what we want to know, is how is this project going to lead to the expansion of broadband? What makes you unique in being able to do the planning, and what makes this planning project unique in order to accomplish that end goal of expanding broadband? So focus on that forward-looking positive outlook rather than describing the problem to us over and over. So then completeness is really the other big component of the application process. ConnectMaine also understands that the community-driven broadband planning process is ongoing. You may be coming in for grant funds anywhere at the start, middle, or end of a planning process. The planning process likely will continue after the project is completed that's funded with grant funds. So recognizing that it's intended to basically prove that the community, it's not intended to prove that you've done the planning. It's intended to prove that the community has what it takes to do the planning. So again, talk about how you're going to do the work. If any elements of the application can't be completed, either because it's part of the planning you're proposing to do, or there's some other obstacle that you're facing, describe that, use that location of the application to talk about how you're going to develop a solution around that as part of the proposed project. And some areas may not be scored due to incompleteness, but don't worry about that. Still apply, because again, with or without grants, planning can happen, and we can help connect you with resources to help keep planning going and have that two-way conversation. And I included the link here to the Maine Broadband Coalition, a nonprofit of all kinds of different entities in the state that are working toward that idea of universal broadband in the state. It's a great network to plug into if you're not already plugged into for peer learning. And I can't stress how important that is to the success of any community-driven broadband planning project as well. So make sure you check them out if you haven't. Getting to a more specific level here, in the application information, one of the questions that we got prior to this workshop is about applicant eligibility. This actually comes directly from our rule, built off from our statute. So our hands are somewhat tied to this. The applicant has to be one of these governmental entities or a local or regional economic development nonprofit. The fiscal agent is the entity that would end up contracting with ConnectMaine to receive grant funds and to ensure compliance of the project. And the applicant's agent could be any individual or entity preparing the application. So the agent doesn't need to be this eligible applicant, but the applicant does need to show this eligibility is met. And then the partner is any other individual or entity that's involved in the project that hasn't yet been identified by those other categories. Although we don't call hired consultants partners in this case. So that doesn't need to be put in the first couple pages of the application. So any partner excluding any hired consultant. Project focus. This is basically where you're going to tell us where you are in the planning process for your community and what you're proposing to do with the funds that you're requesting. So these planning grant applications can be proposing activities for phase 1 planning, or for phase 1 and 2 as a combo, or for only phase 2 activities, or for activities that are beyond phase 1 and 2 that are necessary in order to complete the planning process and get expansion of broadband. So you will need to choose these. The application I screenshotted here just because I felt like this might be an area of hiccup for applicants. Describe the focus of the project, and then it asks questions to kind of guide you in what do I mean by that, right? So that's where you would answer, we're doing a phase 1 project and this is how we're going to develop a community broadband project, right? So that's what you're describing right there. What comes after that, starting with the applicants may apply for, blah, 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 and then there's multiple lists. That's the additional information about what these phases look like, what they entail, what's required at the end, to help you decide what phase you're in and what you're actually proposing to us. So for example, right after it gives you the options of what you can apply for, it describes the elements of a community broadband plan during phase 1 activities, includes these 5 elements. So after you're done with phase 1 activities, you're going to have a plan that does these 5 things. So what you're describing in your application is how you're going to do that, right? If you're applying for phase 1. And then following this list in the application are the lists for phase 2 and the lists for activities beyond phase 2. And we can take more questions about this, but I at least wanted to give you guys an overview of it. Financial commitment is the other place where we've been having hiccups on the infrastructure grants program side of things. So I figured we might as well address it here as well while we're at it. Don't forget the first application element of this section is to describe whether or not the proposed project would occur without the grant being awarded. ConnectMaine is directed to apply its grant funds for the use of projects that wouldn't necessarily occur otherwise, right? So you're demonstrating a need, you are lacking a capacity within the applicant or the broadband committee to complete the planning process, and you're looking for grant funds to help pay for that lack of capacity or that particular element of the planning process. So describe your need in that first element of this section of the application. Don't skip over that first question. Then the budget table is again there for your help, because you are required to itemize these costs as best as you can. They are estimates. You're planning a project, right, when you're proposing an application, but fill out the table. Don't pick and choose what you're filling out. The application and narratives throughout should support the budget and vice versa. So if you are listing something in the budget, make sure your narrative describes why you need what you're saying you need. If your narrative says you've got a major challenge and you need X, Y, and Z, make sure you're capturing the cost of X, Y, and Z in your budget. Those things are supposed to be aligned and supporting one another. And it helps the grants committee justify your budget, understand what you're planning and what the budget is for, and make sure that those costs align with the program's design and purpose. And committed dollars cannot consist of in-kind contributions. You can describe in-kind contributions. It's great to have that broader community support. But in the budget table, you're going to list $0. It's not a financial commitment. It's an in-kind contribution. So hopefully that's helpful as you go to budgeting out your project.
And that's I just want to say that's by rule, by statute. We didn't make that up, so.
Almost all of this is by rule. So if you really hate all of these rules, then you know, it's our state rule that, you know, is problematic. It's nothing that the staff, you know, we're not mean for the heck of it. Unserved areas, this is part of the planning process is an opportunity to assess what's the current state of your situation with regard to broadband in your community. And there's the opportunity to describe that in the pre-certification elements. So I thought it might be helpful to have this slide to share with you all. It's also this main speed testing initiative that's linked here and screenshotted for you is also a really great community engagement tool we're finding. It gets the buzz out that the community is thinking about the challenge of broadband and they're trying to put together a solution. And it's really helpful for the state as we potentially go to attracting federal funds to be able to show something that's not just relying on the industry's reported data, but this is speed testing data from what's actually being experienced on the ground by folks. So whether toward applying for grants or to engage your community on broadband or to help us improve our mapping, I encourage you to definitely take this speed test as often and encourage all your neighbors to do so as well. Take it as often as you have tolerance to do so, because the more times you take it, the better the results are for the uses of it. All right. So with that, I will stop screen sharing here in a second. And I would ask that we let potential applicants to have the floor first. So if you are preparing an application for planning grants this round, you get to raise your hand or unmute yourself first and ask any questions you have about applying for the community broadband planning grants.
Stephanie, it's Susan.
Go for it.
I just wanted to just make a couple of comments on the grant application, specifically around the phase 1 applications. When we received the last round of applications, the budgets were all over the place, and we were trying to sort of figure out what's reasonable, what's not reasonable. So I think a good rule of thumb, it could be that for first town, $5,000 works well. And then if you're doing additional towns, increase that by another $1,000 or $2,000 per town. Phase 1 is really about the community and the community coming together to determine that they want to that they want to tackle changes in broadband for their community. Consultants are fine, but it really, really is the community digging deep and making sure that this is really what they want to go forward. When a community moves from phase 1 to phase 2, to us, it means that they're serious about doing something that is going to involve a financial commitment, either through some town funds or federal grant application, state application. So just keep that in mind as you're putting together your budgets and making sure that your broadband team is very committed. Is a lot of work that a community needs to do in order to move these projects forward.
Yeah, I just pasted into the chat as well for your budget and the grant amount that you're requesting. There are guidelines, some of which Susan just repeated, right below the budget table. So if you're wondering what should my project cost, what should be covered by the grant versus the community's commitment or privately fundraised commitments, that those list of guidelines should be helpful to you. But definitely ConnectMaine has very limited funds. The demand for this planning grants program is skyrocketing. So as the grants committee ends up reviewing more requests for funds than we have to share out, it starts to ask questions. Could the community do this on its own? Do they need to fund that element of the planning process, or should they have the capacity to accomplish it themselves? And if they don't have the capacity, but they ought to, are they able to come up with the financial commitment, like privately fundraising or seeking some reserve funds from the municipality or seeking funds from an economic development organization, those types of ideas. So definitely be thinking about how you can seek those types of financial commitments to match, so to speak, the grant amount requested, and then use the grant amount requested where you absolutely need to. Thinking about the fact that all these other communities are going to be applying for grant funds and we can't award everyone.
This is Mickey Sirota from Searsmont. Very housekeeping question. Can you confirm the next application window for either phase 1 or phase 2?
So the application window is currently open, and the application windows are always listed in the applications that are available on our website. This current application window ends May 27th. So we need your application completed materials at the end of that day.
Thank you. Follow-up question. Has a next application window been set yet?
No,
Thank you.
and we don't have set cycles for our grants programs.
Likely will be in the fall, but you have almost a month to apply for this, so you should be able to do that.
Thank you.
There's a question in the chat that relates to minimum speeds being asymmetrical. That doesn't sound like a community broadband planning grant question. It could relate to our designation of broadband service or unserved areas. So I encourage you to follow that public process separate from this one. Do we have additional hands up? It looks like, William, do you have a question? You'll need to unmute yourself or type.
I do, thank you. Could you just go backwards and explain who's considered a partner for the purposes of the application?
So we give the option of listing a partner for point of contact for projects. And sometimes it's about demonstrating capacity or ability to take on the planning project proposed. So if you've got an applicant who meets the applicant eligibility, and then you've got a fiscal agent, you may not have any other entity to list as a partner. And so you can leave that blank, that's fine. And then what we specifically are looking for in this round of applications is that partners don't include hired consultants.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. James, your hand is up.
Well, that's Bill and I are going back and forth behind the scenes on that same question. So people like Casco Bay, for example, you guys would not consider to be partners.
If they're being paid by the applicant, then no, they're not a partner.
What if it was a Spectrum or a Consolidated or a First Light kind of group?
If they're being paid by the applicant, they're not a partner. They're a hired something. Peggy?
Yeah, I mean, you can, certainly in a phase 1, you shouldn't necessarily have, and I don't think you would, a provider that's a partner, because really your town is thinking about what to do next.
Yeah,
in a phase 2, you might have a partner, but phase 2 is really looking at how you're going to do this. And so really the provider would be the solution, not necessarily the person helping you develop the strategy.
No, the reason I was asking about the provider was just to get clarification, because you say a Casco Bay, for example, isn't a partner because they're being paid, but the knowledge that from a technical perspective and strategy,
that's what you're paying for. That's what you're paying for. So
exactly,
right, so you can describe,
exactly, yeah, but nonetheless, they're still a partner in the process.
Well, they're not really. I mean, you're
as the town tries to make a decision.
Help you with your partner would be the town next door, or
okay, so that's what I was looking for. Yeah. So when you guys,
or the economic development organization,
okay,
or somebody like that, right?
Yeah, okay, so that makes sense. That makes a lot more sense. Thanks.
Yeah, you'll describe what your project is under the project scope, and you'll have a line in your budget that indicates, the different activities you're hiring out. And so they may show up in those places. Carl.
Yes, just another housekeeping level question. It's pretty easy if one wishes to fill out the application using the headings, but excluding all the directions to make for a shorter application form. Is that something you would like us to do or would like us to avoid doing?
I don't know that we have a strong preference. You're not going to get penalized one way or another or anything like that. But if you leave the information in there, then it's there for the grants committee to review quickly, rather than having to have a blank application open for, the scoring or for the instructions to ensure that the application is complete. So, you'd be doing us a favor if you left
Okay.
all of that in there.
Reason enough. Thank you.
Charlie.
Yeah, a couple of quick questions, and I apologize if they're nitpicks. Back on the, when we're talking about pre-certification, you talk about getting community buy-in. Now, we went through a whole planning process a couple of years back. We have survey data that, we did a couple of surveys, as you may recall, of the community, and we've had ongoing talks with the community and the select board and so on. My question is, should I be worried about that, all that survey data being looked on as being stale, because the community is fairly static, and I'm pretty sure that their attitudes have not changed.
I think, describing the lack of change in external factors would be good evidence of support that those elements are still valid, so to speak. Again, don't get over concerned about the quality of what is in the pre-certification in particular. Again, we're looking for it to begin the planning process and to initiate a conversation with ConnectMaine. So if we had questions about, okay, well, your survey is like 3 years old, what's changed in the community, we could come back to you and have that conversation. It certainly wouldn't be anything to be concerned about.
And I have one more quick question, and I apologize to Mary Ellen to getting in front of her here.
It's okay. That's all right.
You were talking, there was a slide where you talked about having certain skill levels on the broadband committee. And, we're a very small community. We may not be able to hit all 5 of those roles particularly well. What are the ramifications of having a small committee that maybe doesn't necessarily touch every one of those 5 categories?
Again, don't be overly concerned with the lack of quality of answering this. That is a flag for you to be like, uh-oh, how can we fill that? What's the obstacle to filling that? How can we overcome that obstacle?
Some of this
If
grant
there was
application,
something in the project scope that you're proposing, and that activity we thought really required somebody with a particular background or role that you don't identify, that might be something we'd come back to you and say, you got additional information on how you're going to accomplish this activity successfully. We might do that.
the point of this application really is to help you think through how you're going to work this. It's not just to give us information, right? It's really, the point of it is to really, as you fill it out, to help you think about how you're going to move your community through this process.
All right, Mary Ellen.
Hi, I have a question about the project area description on page 8. So you're asking, and I want to say too that I really appreciate the improvements that you've made. This is I love what the direction you're moving in with the application. So kudos to you for spending a lot of time on this. So a project area, it says describe the areas of the proposed project and then also proposed to be included in eventual broadband expansion. So what if a community doesn't know yet about where it's going to go? They have a little bit of knowledge about unserved and underserved, but they don't have it precise. So don't laugh, Stephanie, but are you looking for any maps or are you just looking for a narrative?
Just a narrative. So basically, what's your understanding right now of your community with regard to broadband availability? Where in the community are you hoping to ensure that there is broadband availability moving forward? And then also, what areas are going to be involved, outreach to, engaged in the planning process. So is the project area the entire municipality? Is it a portion of it? Is it part of a county? Is it multiple municipalities working together? And yeah, we include those sources for identifying unserved areas so that you can get started. You can start to understand those data sources and the limitations therein as planning gets underway.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
A flag there might be is if an economic development organization was applying for one municipality and then another municipality next door comes in with the separate application, there's obviously not communication going on. That could be a flag for us to initiate that conversation and try to create that networking opportunity. The other flag might be a municipality applying for planning grants, but they don't have plans to outreach to all segments of their population. We'd want to understand why that was, why they made those decisions. The idea of this is it is a community planning process. So we're looking for understanding where the project is going to take place. I didn't very clearly answer Sarah's question in the chat. So since we don't have a hand up, I will now. Part 5 of the application is where the pre-certification elements are included for those who have not submitted pre-certification previously. All applicants need to answer the first couple of questions in that section 5, but that's it. You don't have to go on to section 5A if you've already done pre-certification. You just have to tell us what date that pre-certification was submitted before. Got another question in the chat. Is there opportunity for feedback on the pre-certification prior to submitting the application? We did cover that at the beginning of this workshop, which is being recorded and can be re-reviewed. And I encourage you to re-review it as you're applying, filling out your applications. And you can also share it with other members of your broadband committees. Pre-certification can be done now with the form that's online ahead of your application. But if you're going to get it in like the same day as the application, just use the application. It probably will make more sense to you as the applicant filling it out, and it will help the grants committee as they're reviewing because all the information will be in one document. And then as far as feedback goes, I also covered that at the beginning. We currently have this open application window, and we also have an infrastructure, a very large infrastructure grants application window open. So the capacity for thorough feedback is very limited right now. But we will be reviewing and taking those pre-certification forms and obviously the applications for the planning grants. And any that are unsuccessful, we will be following up with you. We want this to be a conversation with ConnectMaine, and we want to help everybody through the community planning process. I'll also reiterate the importance of the Maine Broadband Coalition in helping to support ConnectMaine, some of ConnectMaine's activities, providing a lot of volunteer effort, but really the value of that network and peer learning that happens in the Maine Broadband Coalition can't be understated. So please join their list. Please check out their website for resources. Please contact your neighboring communities and ask them what they've been thinking about and what they've done. Talk to your regional councils of governments and economic development districts about broadband planning. Really, this is about people. And so it's going to take a lot of people contact and talking and networking in order to get through the planning process.
Yeah, the people who've gone this road before, the people who've done planning grants before and the process of planning grants are also really great resources. So reach out to them because you can learn a lot from what they did that went right and went wrong, and maybe you can skip the stuff that didn't go right.
We did get a very late email that asked about example applications. Because our grants program design allows us to learn as we go, ConnectMaine, we tweak the applications almost every round. So an application from last round really doesn't have a lot of relevance for this round, not only because the application is a little bit different, but because the applicants and the pool of applicants is obviously going to be different. And that's what you're being compared to, is who's in this round of applications. So yes, definitely reach out to past awardees to talk about their process, but just know that you're in a different application round. You're going to be reviewed differently. We had posted a good application from last round for a phase 1 project, but we haven't had recently a very good application for phase 2 projects. In fact, some phase 2 projects are barely getting wrapped up and barely getting completed in compliance with the rule. So moving forward, that's part of what the application changes are about, is supporting communities and being able to prepare all of those elements of a phase 2 project at completion and ensure compliance with the rule moving forward. Great. Any other questions? Okay. Well, hearing none, you're on your own as ConnectMaine staff continues to dig deep into the pool of infrastructure grant applications. So if there's any struggle, just do your best is going to be my advice, so that you can get an application in on time, which is the most important thing.
So, I mean, we're going to have these infrastructure grants done by the end of this month, May. And so, but if you have questions, email us. We'll be happy to answer them.
We'll do our best to
Email
get
me
back
and
to you
I'll be
quickly.
happy to answer them.
And you'll get a different answer every day, which is also,
Which is also really helpful, right?
We call them confetti answers. It's like, oh, I don't know, that sounds good for now. No, joking aside, definitely the last slide included the email address. Definitely reach out if you've got questions. All right, thank you, everybody. Have a great afternoon.